Okay, welcome all. It's great to see such a full audience. I know you're definitely not here to listen to me, so I'll keep my points very short and have some open questions for Francesca. But I just kind of want to start with just a brief description of the moment we're in. So after 15, it's now close to, or 16 months of heavy Israeli bombardment of Gaza, Israeli ground incursion, and the enclave has witnessed a tragic loss of what is officially 47,500 Palestinians. But if we add those missing in the rubble, we add another 10,000. And if we trust the research of the Lancet, that is off by 40%. So, estimates are somewhere around 80,000 killed. We can add to that, of course, indirect deaths, and there the numbers are, of course, much, much higher. There's a near total destruction of critical infrastructure in health, education, housing, and displacement of around 2 million people. The humanitarian crisis has been completely ravaged by an Israeli blockade, which has severely limited aid delivery. Societal collapse means that even the aid that comes in has been very hard to distribute. Now, of course, there is a ceasefire in place, and that has alleviated some of the suffering, but not nearly enough. And the international community grapples with responsibility to respond, but is really unable to respond enough. And we have increasing a number of voices calling what Israel is committing a genocide. So it's an honor to have you with us here, Francesca Albanese. You are the UN Special Rapporteur of the Occupied Palestinian Territories, so welcome very much. I want us to move to Gaza, but I first really want to start with a question about access, because that's not only about really your role in your office and your predecessors, but it's really about access in general for the international community, whether it's international journalists, even UN heads such as Secretary General Antonio Guterres or UNRWA Commissioner General Filippo Lazzarini. I mean, really the bar for who is allowed to enter has really set new negative standards, as it were. So I just want to hear kind of your experience, just to start there, both personally and in your capacity, but also in general, what it means that the international community is so shut out from events on the ground in order to being, reporting what's happening, understanding what's happening. And also, I think a little bit about, how then it becomes so important to listen to voices on the ground.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's really an honor to meet you at 8:30 in the morning, and to see you again. So access. It's interesting you asked me this question because when I was with UNRWA many years ago, I was dealing with access. I was responsible as a legal officer. I was responsible for access and protection. And access was very interesting because it means it primarily concerned how Israel regulated the movement of goods, primarily to Gaza, but also to other parts of the occupied Palestinian territory. And I can tell you, it was clear that it was erratic and not in line with international law. And it was now, in retrospect, this is yet another component of how the UN has normalized the legality of the occupation. So access has always been complicated for the Palestinians. And in a way, the international community, instead of challenging it, it has played the rules set by Israel, who has maintained, as you know now, there is also determination of the International Court of Justice, an unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory, which is to be dismantled. In the past 15 months, and increasingly so as we speak, the Palestinians have been left alone to die, to be slaughtered, to be arrested and detained. And I've been wondering over the past 15 months what has happened to the international community on the ground. The experts were there. Just wondering. I'm not pointing fingers, but just wondering. Because again, you remember in Srebrenica, there was this criticism for years. So first, 8,000 Bosniaks were slaughtered with the UN presence out there. Now we do not have the same reflex, but we should, because nearly 60,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, which is the largest ghetto in the world, which is also the largest refugee, probably not the largest, but one of the oldest, largest refugee camps. And it was largely supervised by the United Nations. The United Nations have also been the victim. But now, in terms of access, as you know, as of access of goods and access of people. So goods have been restricted. Access of food, medicine, water, and electricity to Gaza have been restricted since the aftermath of October 7, 2023. But it's not that it was a free flow before then. There was a 17-year blockade which had already depleted, severely depleted, most of the population in Gaza. Yes, in Gaza there were healthy people, wealthy people. But the reality is that 45% of the people in Gaza before October 23 were unemployed. And 85% of the people in Gaza depended on humanitarian aid. Much of what entered before October 7 was tightly controlled by Israel. We know that, I mean, there is this argument that has been absorbed even by the stones in the United Nations, and that Israel controlled even the calories that used to enter, let alone the movement of people in and out Gaza, including serious humanitarian cases. As a special rapporteur in the 16 months before October 7, sorry, I mean, this is the date that it's the year 0 in the West, so we cannot, apologies for referring to that in, I mean, looking at how the Palestinians live. But however, the thing is that even before, I have written to Israel many times, and I've reported on cases of people, including children, who died because they couldn't, either medical equipment couldn't enter Gaza, or these children couldn't leave the Gaza Strip, and so they died while waiting for a permit. So access has always been complicated. And now, of course, with the tightening of the blockade, it is getting even more complicated. And again, just while it was happening in Gaza, and you surely know, the West Bank has not experienced a different fate, in the sense that while our eyes were focused, without the resolve anyway, on Gaza, Israel has enforced curfew for long times. It has besieged Palestinian cities in the West Bank. It has made the movement and the access to East Jerusalem or certain places of the West Bank extremely difficult. It's been a horrible period, including in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. So clearly it has had operational implication for UN personnel who were supposed to deliver humanitarian aid, let alone protection. Protection is really the missing in action word more and more in general in international operations. It's very sad, but also for the Palestinians. But I want to focus, my last comment will be on access of UN and others, foreign correspondents, to Gaza and the West Bank as we speak. I mean, during the genocide, there was no foreign correspondence in Gaza. It was a war to all purposes, and yet no one was asking, yeah, but if it's a war, I mean, is it the only conflict zone where journalists are not allowed to go? It reminds really of Sri Lanka when it got rid of the Tamil tiger. You remember? Closed the zone and carpet bombed everything. In fact, when the bombing of Gaza started, the first images that I had in mind were how the Sri Lanka government got rid of the Tamil tiger. So there has been no access of journalists, access has been hampered of the UN, and I don't think that the UN is a victim here, as it portrays itself. Sorry to be critical, but I often hear, including now, they are cut. Mark my words, in 1 year, if things continue like that, there won't be UNRWA anymore in the occupied Palestinian territory. And I don't think that the UN as an organization has done enough to ensure the existence of UNRWA. And I am appalled to hear arguments like, well, we have to pack and go because Israel doesn't issue visas. Has the UN registered that the ICJ has issued an advisory opinion that is binding for the United Nations as well? And it says you cannot abide by the rules you cannot recognize as legal the consequences of an illegal act. Israel doesn't have, as I was saying yesterday, Israel doesn't have the authority to issue visas from an international law point of view, because it doesn't, to the people in the OPT. It doesn't. It's not Israel's territory. It's not a place where Israel can exert sovereignty. Visas are a matter of migration policies, and it doesn't concern the occupied territory, And so there should have been a strong pushback, and it has not. And so access remain very difficult, and it will become more and more difficult in the months to come, because just so that we are all on the same page, I don't have a crystal ball, but because I know the history of Palestine through the forced displacement of the Palestinians, I'm 100% convinced of what I say, and there is nothing so far that has proven me wrong. Israel has one objective only: to move the Palestinian out, and I'm putting it nicely, to move the Palestinian out of the occupied Palestinian territory in order to exert exclusive Israeli, namely Jewish Israeli sovereignty from the river to the sea. And if we don't actively stop it, it will happen. I mean, it's a matter of time. So if now there should be significant emergency measures to enter more robustly the occupied Palestinian territory and use all possible leverages, unless we want to be the spectators to the largest and sequels of the Nakba, which started 76 years ago.
I mean, Trump's latest statement is, however spontaneous or whatever it was, it really green lights that kind of thinking. I mean, for Israel, this is a very clear signal that the superpower is definitely not going to stop them in that regard. I just wanted to kind of pick up a little bit about what you said about journalists. I mean, we'll be getting back to the UN, but I think it's really, really important to highlight the fact that this war is unique in the amount of journalists killed on the ground. I mean, Palestinian journalists killed it's been a number that's uncomparable to any other wars. So, the border closings combined with the killing of Palestinian journalists means the absence of information or on the ground. I mean, we see it. It's not that we don't see it, but the concerted effort of keeping information out and having this ongoing threat against information is really harrowing, I think.
Can I add something on this? Well, it's true what you say, but I think it's unique in so many respects, in the sense that in such a short period of time, an entire area of 365 square kilometers where 2.3 million people were entrapped, half of whom were children, has been turned into rubble. And this is not just it's also the war or the assault, let's call it war just for the sake of the conversation, but where the highest number of UN personnel has been killed And also, I mean, there has been such a targeting of civilians that we can say also university deans. And again, everyone has been targeted. So medical personnel. So this is why I say, if we see the Palestinians as a people being targeted, the group has been targeted as such, this is key to start identifying the crime of genocide. And there's been an intention to target all of them, so this is unique. But also, as you pointed to journalists, this is also, and for me, this is the most discomforting as a Western person, discomforting record. I don't think that in recent history, there has been a war or a genocide that has been so cheered up by Western media. It's not something that has happened just, so Western journalists, instead of reporting on what was happening or expressing solidarity with their Palestinian colleagues, I mean, of course, there have been independent medias and also professionals who have faced consequences, but generally the mainstream corporate media has been instrumental in amplifying certain misinformation or outright fabrications of the Israeli media. Very few people have questions. I mean, one of the best interviews I've seen in this part of the world is actually by a Norwegian journalist who was really grilled. While there are in the US and other cases like this, in Europe, it's almost missing. So they are also part of the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to add, I think we're very lucky here in Norway. I mean, we have a coverage that's been far better, I would say, than a lot of the media out there. And I mean, just personally, I've experienced it. There are type of questions I've gotten when being interviewed by, for instance, British media that I wouldn't have gotten in Norwegian media. So it's been a landscape, but I mean, I very much understand your point that not only has there been this closure of information, but in very many instances they've kind of taken the Israeli narrative for granted in a sense.
Can I ask you can you hear me? Well, yeah. Yeah. Can I ask you what are the questions that you were asked on other?
So a very concrete example had to do with UNRWA, and it had to do with the terror allegations in January. So in the Norwegian media, it was kind of, so I said, look, these are allegations, they're very serious, the UN takes them seriously, and they will be investigated. And you know, whatever is the result, if the allegations are true, that's problematic for those 12, but there is a larger context here. And I was kind of allowed to get away with that. When I made the same type of explanation, I think it was to Sky News, basically the premise of the discussion was, well, UNRWA employs terrorists. So why don't you accept this? Why don't you condemn UNRWA? And I was like, but look, there is a context, and I tried to explain it, but the premise was set. Yeah. It wasn't allegations, it was kind of, they were terrorists, and UNRWA must have known. And that was just a very difficult, for me, like, from a Norwegian context, that was just unusual, in a sense.
Welcome to my world.
Yeah.
But if I may comment,
of course,
that, and I don't want to take over, but this is very important. I mean, the story that you decide to tell. When you start a conversation with something that is so factually incorrect, and I will elaborate on that, like UNRWA harbors terrorists, then you are put in a position where you need to correct the factually wrong narrative, and then all of a sudden you appear as justifying this, and I say, no, I'm just here educating you. You should be the one. You are biased because you don't know the fact, and you want to understand why I'm saying the fact. I have been, and I know that by personal experience. When I was with UNRWA, I was the legal officer responsible, I don't know if you surely have come across this, to put together the neutrality reports to the Americans. So in order to secure American funds, UNRWA had to report on all contracts it had, all vendors, all staff members, refugees, beneficiaries, and activities undertaken every 6 months. And neutrality, breaches of UNRWA's neutrality, like, for example, who had entered UNRWA premises? Hamas or the Palestinian Authority or the Israeli forces. And we had reports, incident reports, that I and others would carefully review. It was 2 months, every 6 months, and this would go to Israel. I can't remember in 3 years to have seen a query or a scandal mounted on the fact that UNRWA was employing Hamas personnel or etc. Whenever there was a question, in fact, responses were given. And so, again, these arguments is spurious, is absolutely spurious. But also, it has been, look at the firing, and this is where I say the UN has been doing so many important, good things, but it's also part of the problem, and especially when it comes to UNRWA, because the staff members who have been accused of being part of the attack on October 7, they were fired, terminated for the best interest of the agency. And you know why? I'm not saying that they didn't do anything. As a lawyer, I just expect to see the evidence. There have been investigations over investigations. First of all, Israel has never provided the evidence that these people were involved in the terrorist attack, whatever you want to call it. But also, even the United Nations, there has been an independent audit, the Colonna report, and then there has been a UN report, a UN investigative report, which has concluded that there was no evidence, which doesn't mean that they hadn't committed crimes, but if they had committed, there was no evidence. And UNRWA, in general, doesn't terminate on the grounds of suspicion. It is to be proven beyond any reasonable doubt. And you see, so I also think that the UN has given to pressure on this case. Instead of defending as if it was the last thing they had to do, the integrity and the reputation of the agency.
I mean, to Lazzarini defense, in a sense, I mean, he says...
I'm not accusing him.
No, I mean, but to kind of, in a sense, think through the process. I think, and he says this explicitly, we did reverse due process because we kind of in a panic mode. I mean, we saw what the donors were doing, we tried to protect the agency, and as you said, that then those 12 were thrown under the bus, basically. I think the problem from like a political sense is that I think the thinking was that then you're defending the agency, but it also means that you're undermining the agency because it gives kind of a signal that there is something to hide, which is really an unfortunate by-effect. But I want to move on to the legal institutions, because I think this is really one of the most interesting aspects of this moment in history with regard to Israel-Palestine, because on the one hand we have institutions finally standing up. I mean, we have the ICJ genocide case, and we'll return to that soon. We have the ICJ case or statement saying that the occupation is illegal and that there is a deadline for it to end. And we also have ICC warrant on Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, as well as Daif, but he's been killed. At the same time, the US has started sanctioning the ICC. So I just really want to hear, this is your area of expertise, really. How would you describe this moment, this real battle for these institutions standing up in an arena where they haven't really dared stand up before, but also this extreme attack? I mean, for me, this is a moment where, of course, the US is protecting Israel, but here it's really willing to burn down the international institutions in order to defend Israel, which for me is an escalation of, I mean, it's a drastic escalation of a trend.
Yeah, I'll share two reflections, two observations, one to the point you raised, but also something broader on the moment we live in. I think that we are living a historical moment. I mean, there are parts or paths in the arc of history where we have the sense that things are accelerating. This is one of those many things, like the international justice system has been sort of quiet for a long time, and all of a sudden it has started moving very fast, delivering what was unimaginable years ago. Now, of course, I'm often asked, but the ICC didn't endorse your genocide analysis. And say, you know what, shuai. And in the sense that I would have never imagined the ICC to issue the arrest warrants that has issued against the Israeli leaders that have been reached by arrest warrants, but also the kind of the kind of crimes that have been identified. And the ICJ advisory opinion that was issued last year was also monumental and seismic in a way, because it's very broad, it's very historically correct, so it's not the usual dehistoricizing, and it's not the usual decontextualizing that you might find in both legal document and UN document. It's a very powerful tool. And my only regret is that generally people have not absorbed the importance of this as a tool to change things on the ground. And this is why I keep on hammering on this. Both government officials and civil society use it. So it's great what South Africa and other member states, I think there are 10 now, they have, there are 10 member states that have a case against genocide as being committed by Israel. There is also the other case, the judicial proceedings instituted by Nicaragua versus Germany for supporting the genocide in Gaza. So there are things that are happening, but we cannot expect international justice, especially when it comes to individual responsibility, the individual liability. We cannot expect the ICC to deliver all what is needed. It's impossible, really materially impossible. Only if the ICC had to investigate only the case of Palestine, it would take decades with all the crimes that have been committed in the last 50 months alone, and with the fair trial standards that there are. So why I'm saying that? Because there is a necessity, as it has been attempted in Norway, to use domestic jurisdiction, universal jurisdiction, to investigate and prosecute crimes that have been committed in the occupied Palestinian territory. And this is another way to explore and expand the complementarity between domestic systems and the international judicial system. So it's incredible what's happening. It's a step forward. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. And I think that there are cases like the International Commission of Jurists here attempted to start proceedings for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Sorry if for crimes against humanity. Sorry if I don't remember the entire case. But again, in a way, this was a precursor of what then has happened at the ICC level. So this should continue to happen. There are also, this is an important point, accountability needs to be understood to the fullest. It's not just Israel's responsibility as a state or the responsibility of Israelis individuals. This genocide in particular, but also the legality of the occupation, would have not been possible at this speed and reaching this depth hadn't it been for the cooperation, the support, the assistance, and the complicity of a number of actors internationally. And investigations are starting. There are civil society actors who are taking their governments to court in the Netherlands, in Denmark, in the UK, for having supplied weapons. Circumventing due diligence checks and balances that frankly should have been much, much more thorough, much higher in the context of the war crimes that were being committed in Gaza. War crimes, and I'm not saying they're war crimes because it's a smaller crime. It's very serious. I don't read the international crimes as a hierarchy. War crimes, crimes against humanity, and the genocide. Horizontally, they are very different crimes, but at least you could see that the mass destruction of universities, of hospitals, of churches and mosques, and the killing of, the burning of tents where the refugees had been displaced, or the forced displacement and the starvation. So there were grounds to lower the threshold. That's it. So I encourage civil society, attorneys, lawyers, really to get together, because this is a transformational moment, and this is the time, if we want to keep up the pace with the revolution that we are going through, in terms of, and there is an upheaval, silent, but there is an upheaval against the system. We need to give it teeth, and the teeth come with accountability. So I encourage everyone at the national level to engage with that. The other thing I wanted to comment, because you said, is the US, in a way, what the US has openly, manifestly said, recognized, its willingness to go against international law. Is it eroding the system? Of course. But this is not something that started with 2 weeks ago with the new US administration. The previous administration has contributed to this. And frankly, I used to say, the dismantlement, the erosion of the international law-based order started with the Iraqi war. But then, if I go back in history, there are other cases where, like the arm of the international legal system has been twisted. And so I also think that there is another state which has never been held accountable together with Israel. Again, all member states have, to a certain degree, some more, some less, records of human rights violations, some very brutal records. And at the same time, there are really few states who have gone on and on with impunity. And one is Israel, which has never been held accountable, but the other one is the United States. We never question the crimes that the United States have committed through and through. And probably this is the moment where we need to open our eyes and realize that no, it has never been a fair system. It has never been an equal system, but it has improved. It has improved 75 years ago, 80 years ago. It was the international community was made of 51 or 53 member states, and now there are 193. And certain things have changed. Probably the dismemberment of Palestine with the partition plan wouldn't have happened with 193 member states in the General Assembly. So we have made some progress. We just need to give this progress more teeth now, because this is the moment of change that we are going through.
I mean, to that last point, the partition plan, no Muslim or Arab state voted for it. I think that goes really to say something about the global context. This whole thing has been, built around that any state with any vested interest in that area did not support that plan. Anyway, I think I want to move to the genocide case, because it's very striking, and I think this is one of those particularities of international law, that because genocide is the most serious crime, it is also the one that has the highest bar in terms of proof, which means paradoxically that while the most egregious crime is happening, you have to provide so much proof that it's happening that you allow it to happen because you're collecting and certifying and thinking over the evidence. On the other hand, and while the ICJ is thinking this over and going through the evidence, you have been very vocal that it is genocide. So I'd really like to hear, your thoughts both on this discrepancy, but also, what is your core argument for why this is genocide?
Yes, I think that it's a good exercise for all of us to always activate our critical capacity when discussing certain, I appeal to the lawyers primarily, but you see, the way we in good faith project certain analysis hamper the development of the analysis itself. Because it's true that genocide somewhat is the most serious crime, but because it's one of the, again, we shouldn't overstate that in the sense that calling the genocide the crime of crimes gives the sense that it's a hierarchy. And I'm not sure that genocide, in a way, is most serious. Is the most insidious. Is the most insidious. It should be the most insidious to commit. And it's the most insidious to prove, because there are two intentions that one needs to have and one needs to prove. However, I also think that international judicial system has been extremely conservative, and somewhat it has added layers of interpretation that is not given, that cannot be deduced automatically from the Genocide Convention. And let me be more clear. The Genocide Conventions stipulate that genocides that it constitutes genocides acts directed against members of a group as such. And the group can be identified as a national, religious, racial, or ethnic group. No political reasons, no cultural reasons, for historical reasons. But however, these four criteria are there to identify the group. And the International Court of Justice, small parenthesis, has determined that the Palestinians are a protected group for the purposes of the application of the Genocide Convention. However, there are several acts that are identified as being part of a genocidal conduct. Acts of killings members of the group, the infliction of severe and bodily or mental harm to members of the group, creating conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of the group, transfer of children from the group, and prevention of birth. The critical element to identify genocide, to say it's genocide, is that these acts that are criminal in and of themselves are sustained by an intent to, through this act, destroy the group, as such. And this is very hard to prove, because genocide, it's hard to commit. Because again, there are checks and balances. In 2024, there should be protection mechanisms that kick in to prevent a genocide. And I would like to bring your attention to the fact that Israel, the only democracy of the Middle East, is not Rwanda, with all due respect for Rwanda of 30 years ago, but Rwanda didn't have the sophisticated, democratic, self-defined democratic or rule of law system that Israel has, the parliament, the government, and the distinction between cabinet and the other members of the government and the judiciary, let alone the civil society, and a very healthy and vibrant society, which takes the streets to protest the rise of rent, the appalling policy vis-à-vis the hostages that the government has taken, the judicial reform. So there are checks and balances. They probably were not in the former Yugoslavia, collapsing former Yugoslavia, and in Rwanda over 30 years ago, first of all. But also there are instruments that should be triggered at the international level, because the Genocide Convention sets the 3 obligations: to prevent, to stop, and to punish genocide. And how do we stop genocide? How to prevent genocide if we refuse to see the signs? It's incredible that member states say, we cannot really talk about genocide because there is no judicial proceeding. So look at the paradox that we would grant, if we had to wait until the completion of a judicial trial according to fair trial standards that I'm glad to see being part of our system, we would grant more rights and protection to the alleged perpetrator than to the people who have to be protected under the Genocide Convention. This is why there are preventive mechanisms. So the International Court of Justice has looked at genocide in other cases, like in Rwanda and former Yugoslavia, and it has said, in fact, that there is a duty to prevent. So especially member states who can exert influence, who can have leverage, who can leverage the potentially genocidal conduct, as soon as they take notice that a genocide might be committed, they need to intervene. And that moment is the 26th of January, when the International Court of Justice, solicited by South Africa, issued provisional measures, recognizes the possibility, the plausibility of the risk of genocide in the occupied Palestinian territory. So, nothing has worked to prevent this. We can argue, yeah, but same thing in Rwanda, same thing in former Yugoslavia, yeah, but we have had, this has been the most televised in real time genocide of history. And not only the Israeli state, because this is not some acts of the government, have incited to genocide. Soldiers have been seen like committing acts upon the exhortation and the incitement. There was a direct link between the genocidal incitement and what the soldiers were doing as willful executioners. And also, the government has done nothing to stop what the war cabinet was deciding, neither the parliament, let alone the judiciary. So if we don't see the state responsibility in this case, I don't know, but also the society at large has been crossed by a wind of genocidal calls from west to east, north to south, and erase Gaza and punish them all and kill them all has been something which has been really discussed and laughed about in TV programs. No outcry other than from a very few fringe of the Israeli society, which I acknowledge these Israelis should not be invisibilized. They're part of the resistance of the human rights movement to the genocide. But again, things have gone very, very wrong.
I mean, I think in general, this aversion against calling something genocide is part of the system in a sense. I mean, famously, people in the Clinton administration called Rwanda not a genocide, but what looked like a series of genocide-like events. because if you called it a genocide as a whole, then you had to intervene and stop it. So you could just describe it as many separate events that by themselves looked like genocide. But
yeah, but you know, like in the case, I mean, you see the hubris, really, the shamelessness somewhat of the past US administration. For 1.5 years, they've said, we cannot comment on we do not know if it's genocide, there should be a judicial proceeding. And then, so let's forget all the occasions in history where genocide has been ascertained without a judicial proceeding. Most of the cases where genocides have occurred are established by historians, sometimes human rights commissions or UN Commission of Inquiries. This is the majority of the cases versus judicial proceedings. But the point is that the very US administration has recognized in January, I believe, that in Sudan, a genocide had occurred. So you see the discrepancy, the double standards, etc., and there has been very, very limited reaction to this at the international level.
So we've mostly been talking about Gaza. You mentioned the West Bank already, and I think one of the really serious things going on is what's happening on the West Bank. And if it wasn't for how terrible things are in Gaza, we would really, really focus on the West Bank. And I think it's important that we, acknowledge that. And I just want to hear your kind of analysis of what's happening on the West Bank right now, because it's not on the front pages.
Yeah, I really urge you, all of us, not to make the same mistake of continuing to fragment the Palestinian people. There is no Gaza versus West Bank. There are the Palestinian people who have been fragmented in cells of segregation with where they have experienced a different kind of oppression. But we should really have a people-centered approach. So, I really encourage you, if you want to read something that I've written, I really encourage you to read my last report, Genocide as Colonial Erasure. Because, again, I keep on learning things. I keep on seeing the reality unveiling itself. And there is an extra layer of understanding as I journey through what the Palestinians are going through. But if we really have a people-centered approach, I would say that, first of all, I see what you mean, but I might disagree on the fact that our focus has been on Gaza because of the enormity of what was going on, and this is why we have not looked at what was happening in the West Bank. Because chances are that we wouldn't, yes, we would look at what's happening in the West Bank, but not intervene, because in the 16 months, I keep on repeating that, but in the 16 months where I've been a special rapporteur before October 7, I've been saying that every other breath, it's becoming a really powder keg. The West Bank, Israel has killed 460 Palestinians living under occupation, and largely by shooting them at the torso and in the head. There is this shoot to kill policy that Israeli organizations like B'Tselem have documented by or breaking the silence, for example, of course, on top of the Palestinians' human rights organizations. And so it was already there, and it has intensified. So while all our eyes, especially including mine, in the first 6 months of the genocide were all on the Gaza Strip, soon after I submitted my Anatomy of a Genocide report. By the way, parenthesis, I had not been alone in denouncing that that there was a risk of genocide and then a serious risk of genocide, and then a genocide was unfolding because about 30 UN experts, independent experts of the United Nations, had made that conclusions and denounced it over and over. The ICJ had issued provisional measures. But then in the second semester of the genocide, other voices had come up, other reputable NGOs, last but not least Amnesty International, Israeli historians, genocide scholars. and they are not, so, and they have even produced databases that so the evidence has grown. But why I insist on my last report, because while the analysis keep on staying on being limited to the Gaza Strip, I say, but we need to look at three things, and this is what I call the triple lens, totality lens. We should look at the totality of the conduct and crimes against the totality of the people, of the group, members of the group as such, meaning the Palestinians as such, in the totality of the territory that Israel occupies militarily and claims, over which claims exclusive exclusive sovereignty, which has happened in the West Bank, first and foremost, Judea and Samaria, as the Israeli government and others call it, and in Gaza as well, increasingly. So it's very clear what Israel is trying to do. What it does is what it has done in the past as well. Under the fog of war, it applies the shock doctrine. So it takes advantage of a cataclysmatic change or moment of crisis to advance changes on the ground. This is what the US have done in the Middle East, and this is what Israel continues to do in the occupied Palestinian territory. So we should be able to link the dots, because if we don't link the dots, we will come up with the usual sectorial, fragmented and further fragmenting and problematizing solutions for the Palestinians. So in the West Bank, Israel has killed over 860 people since October 7, the majority of whom, 830, between October 2023 and October 2024. And I was saying, look, it does, in the report, I was saying the genocidal acts and the genocidal violence is leaking out into the West Bank. Because look at the shoot to kill policy, targeting the Palestinians as such, including don't quote me, but I think it's 170 children. Not very good with numbers. And by imprisoning 9,400 Palestinians in the West Bank alone, most of them without charge, without trial, and torturing them, abusing them. So there was no difference. Something that I've heard since December 2023 from human rights organizations is, look, there is no difference. Don't make this difference in Israeli prisons, military or in other prisons. There has been an intensification of violence and punishment and revenge against the Palestinians, and doesn't matter where they are from. You know, so it does. My assessment is that the violence that was already ongoing in the West Bank prior to October 7 has intensified after October 7, and now it has reached a new climax, because after the ceasefire in Gaza, immediately, Israel has moved its firing machine, so to speak, toward the West Bank by using the same script that it has used in Gaza. Cleansing the territory, destroying entire residential areas. The Jenin refugee camp has been turned into rubble. This is what, not turned into rubble, sorry, has been, many parts of the refugee camp have been turned into rubble, and it has been depopulated. And in one day, we saw the detonation 1 week ago of 24 residential buildings in one go. Mm-hmm. So you see, this is the same script that has been applied to Gaza and then to Lebanon, and now we are normalizing this reality of a world without civilians. So civilians are not there to be protected because they're all presumed terrorists. This is where we are right now. And yes, it's part of the erosion of the international human rights system.
I mean, personally, I think it's important to recognize two things that are true at the same time. That there is a Palestinian body and large, but that the policy of segregating them has been so successful that they are in reality two areas. So it's this thought exercise to think of them as one, but also think of them as two at the same time. And I mean, it is really challenging, and I think there is this kind of political ping pong in a sense, where one thing is done in one of those areas and then it reflects on the other. I mean, what you're saying about Jenin and Gaza, Israeli politicians have stated it bluntly.
Yeah.
We're going to, do a Gaza on Jenin. I mean, a Gazification of Jenin is a word that has been used. And also, if we go back to the question of journalists, I mean, the killing of Shirin Abu Akleh in the West Bank, which had no ramifications, even though she was a US citizen, even though she was, one of Al Jazeera's most famous journalists, really, for me, opened the floodgates for what's been happening with Palestinian journalists in Gaza. So it's not always that, Gaza is where we test things and then we apply it in Jenin, but also the other way around in a sense. And the wall and that kind of security mechanism, it's applied differently, but it's variations of the same, I would say.
I don't disagree with you, and this is why I say if we are able to maintain a people-centered approach, we totally see what you're saying. And in fact, since the beginning of the occupation, Gaza and the West Bank have always been treated separately, segregated in several ways, and this was intentional, to separate the people, to fragment the Palestinian people. What I was saying is, let's try to be aware of it, but also challenge it. Because the Palestinians, especially in the genocidal assessment, this is what I'm trying to focus on. In the genocidal assessment, we need to be able to see that any Palestinian is targeted. Doesn't matter where he or she is as such.
And I think, to your point about it being people-centered, I mean, the Palestinian leadership have really also played their cards badly into this game, in a sense, with Hamas in Gaza and the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, whilst if you take a people-centered approach, it's the Palestinian people, and then Gaza and the West Bank is one body, right?
Yeah, and if I can comment on this, the Palestinians has played a very, very problematic role, because it's clear to all of us that the purpose of the Palestinian Security Service is not to protect the Palestinians. Otherwise, it would be the most ineffective security forces in the world, because there have been Palestinians attacked in villages. There have been attacks that Israeli human rights organizations have called pogroms, when you have these mobs made of hundreds of people torching, incinerating civilian possessions and premises, and terrorizing the population. And it has been carried out, these have been carried out since 2023, when with the new government coalition as it came on board. And I was a special rapporteur back then, so I was shocked because I had never seen this other than occasionally and by fringes, violent settlers, which have become more and more the norm, and more they've come out really, and of course it has grown exponentially. And as we speak, the Palestinians call the West Bank, many Palestinians refer to the West Bank on social media as the Wild West Bank, because it's totally out of control. Where is the Palestinian Authority? Have you ever seen the Palestinian Authority security forces intervene to protect a Palestinian village, or confronting the settlers, or including when they entered area A and B, where they should exercise, or area A. So you see, it makes no sense whatsoever. But also what makes even less sense to me, and I know that the Palestinian Authority completely disagrees with me. Don't think that I only get criticized by the Israelis. But I have to say what I think, what I read in terms of facts and compliance with international law. As of December the 5th, the violence in Jenin, Nablus, Tulkarem, Tubas has intensified, also thanks to the Palestinian Authority security forces, which have cracked down dramatically Palestinians protests and maybe resistance, but the point is, and freedom of expression, because they have expelled Al Jazeera, not differently from Israel. So again, I don't think that this climate, and I know the arguments of the Palestinian Authority saying you don't understand, there are incredible forces at play. Yeah. No, meaning I don't mean to be disrespectful. I know, I understand, but eventually who pays here is yet again the Palestinian people.
Thank you so much. I have lots more questions. I know people in the audience wanted questions as well, but there's so much to discuss. We could have gone on for hours, unfortunately. Not because I don't like your company, but because the situation is so tragic. Yeah. So we have to end now. You have a lot of meetings while you're here in Oslo. So thank you so much for showing up. It's been depressing, but very interesting and great. Thank you.